The cabin lights were dimmed to a soft amber glow, mimicking nighttime even though somewhere far below, the sun was still shining on the Pacific Ocean. Jessica Chen moved gracefully down the aisle of Pacific Airways Flight 447, balancing a tray of coffee cups with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing this for months, though in reality, it had only been 8 weeks. At 19 years old, she was the youngest flight attendant on this Boeing 777-300ER, and she felt it every single day. The other crew members were kind but protective, treating her like a little sister who needed guidance on everything from dealing with difficult passengers to perfecting her French braid for the uniform requirements. "Cream or sugar?" Jessica asked a businessman in seat 23C, offering her warmest smile. He barely looked up from his laptop, just shook his head and returned to his spreadsheet. She'd learned not to take it personally. 6 hours into an 11-hour trans-Pacific flight, most passengers were lost in their own worlds, movies, books, sleep, or work. Jessica continued toward the rear galley, where Monica Rodriguez, the senior flight attendant with 15 years of experience, was preparing another round of beverages. Monica's dark hair was pulled back in an immaculate bun, not a single strand out of place despite the long shift. "How are you holding up, rookie?" Monica asked with a grin, her Puerto Rican accent softening the teasing edge in her voice. "My feet are killing me," Jessica admitted, setting down her tray and stretching her toes in the regulation heels. "How do you do this for 15 years? "Good shoes and better insoles," Monica laughed. "And you get used to it. Trust me, in a year you won't even notice." She handed Jessica a fresh pot of coffee. "Cabin 2 needs a refill and then we can take our break." Jessica nodded, grabbing the pot along with a stack of cups. As she turned to leave, Monica called after her, "Hey, you still studying for that pilot thing?" Jessica paused, feeling a familiar flutter of excitement in her chest. "Yeah, I'm working on my instrument rating now, hoping to take the written exam next month." "Instrument rating?" Monica raised an eyebrow. "Sounds complicated." "It is," Jessica said, unable to hide her enthusiasm. "It's learning to fly using only instruments, no visual references. Like flying through clouds or at night when you can't see the horizon. You have to trust your gauges completely." Monica chuckled and shook her head. "Well, let's hope you never need to use that up here in the big leagues. These birds practically fly themselves anyway." Jessica smiled and headed back into the cabin, though Monica's words stayed with her. These birds practically fly themselves. It was true that modern aircraft were marvels of automation, but Jessica knew from her training that automation was only as good as the people who programmed it. Pilots were still essential. They were decision makers, problem solvers, the last line of defense when things went wrong. Not that things went wrong often. Commercial aviation was statistically the safest form of travel. Jessica reminded herself of this fact whenever her mother called, worried sick about her baby girl flying across oceans. The truth was, Jessica loved everything about aviation. She'd fallen in love with flying at 14 when her father, an aerospace engineer, took her to an airshow in Riverside. Watching the pilots execute barrel rolls and knife-edge passes ignited something in her she didn't know existed. 2 years later, on her 16th birthday, her parents gifted her an introductory flight lesson at the local flight school. She'd soloed at 17, earned her private pilot's license at 18, and immediately started working toward her commercial certificate. But flight training was expensive, breathtakingly expensive, and her family, while comfortable, wasn't wealthy. When Pacific Airways offered her a flight attendant position, she deferred her aerospace engineering degree at USC and taken the job. The plan was simple: work for a year or two, save money, finish her ratings, and eventually apply to the airlines as a pilot. 87 hours. That's how much flight time she'd logged so far, all of it in single-engine Cessna 172s, tiny four-seater propeller planes that weighed about as much as a mid-size sedan. The Boeing 777 she was currently serving on weighed 350 times more than her little Cessna and had engines powerful enough to lift an entire apartment building. The scale was incomprehensible. Jessica made her rounds through cabin 2, refilling coffee cups and collecting trash. Most passengers were asleep, their seats reclined, heads tilted at uncomfortable angles. A young mother in row 18 was gently rocking her infant, and Jessica caught her eye and smiled. The woman smiled back gratefully, exhaustion evident in her face. In the forward galley, Jessica finally grabbed a bottle of water and a small bag of pretzels, her dinner for the evening. She pulled out her worn copy of the Instrument Flying Handbook and flipped to the chapter on approach procedures. The pages were covered in her handwritten notes, diagrams of instrument approaches, and sticky tabs marking important sections. "Still hitting the books?" asked James, one of the male flight attendants, as he passed by with a trash bag. "Always," Jessica replied. "Did you know that instrument approaches have minimum descent altitudes that vary based on aircraft category and visibility requirements?" James laughed. "I absolutely did not know that, and I'm perfectly happy not knowing it. You're a special kind of crazy, Chen." Maybe she was, but Jessica couldn't imagine doing anything else with her life. Every flight she worked, she paid attention to the sounds, the change in engine pitch during descent, the whir of flaps extending, the gentle bump of touchdown. She noted how the aircraft responded to turbulence, how the pilots made their PA announcements, how they managed the cockpit workload. Up front in the cockpit, Captain Robert Mitchells and First Officer David Park were monitoring their progress across the Pacific. Jessica had met them briefly during boarding. Captain Mitchells was 58, with silver hair and the calm demeanor of someone who'd logged over 20,000 flight hours. First Officer Park was younger, 34, friendly and energetic. They were professionals, the kind of pilots who made flying look effortless. Jessica glanced at her watch, 2:47 a.m. Pacific time, though her body had no idea what time it really was. They were currently over the middle of nowhere, the vast, dark expanse of the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly below. The nearest land was probably hundreds of miles away. Above them, stars glittered in the thin atmosphere at 38,000 feet. Everything was routine. The weather forecast for Tokyo showed clear skies. Fuel was on plan. All systems were operating normally. It was, as Monica had said, another boring night shift. Jessica took a sip of her water and returned to her handbook, reading about partial panel operations, flying when some instruments fail. It seemed like something from another era, when aircraft were less reliable. Modern jets like the 777 had multiple redundant systems. The chances of catastrophic failure were infinitesimally small. She was so absorbed in her reading that she almost didn't hear it at first, the subtle change in the cockpit call chime. It wasn't the normal passenger call ding. It was insistent, urgent. Jessica looked up. The intercom crackled to life, and First Officer Park's voice came through, strained and tight. "Cabin crew to the cockpit. Medical emergency. Now." The handbook slipped from Jessica's hands. Monica was already running toward the front of the aircraft, her face pale. Jessica's heart began to pound as she jumped to her feet and sprinted after her. This wasn't routine anymore. This wasn't boring. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. Jessica's regulation heels clattered against the aircraft floor as she raced down the aisle behind Monica. Passengers stirred from sleep, confused faces turning toward the commotion. A few sat up, sensing something was wrong by the urgency in the flight attendants' movements. "What's happening?" a woman called out, but Jessica didn't stop to answer. Dr. Emily Thornton, a passenger from first class who'd identified herself as a physician during boarding, was already ahead of them, her medical bag in hand. She must have heard the urgency in the call and responded instinctively. The three women converged at the cockpit door simultaneously. Monica punched in the emergency access code with shaking fingers. The lock mechanism clicked, and the reinforced door swung inward. The sight that greeted them turned Jessica's blood to ice. Captain Robert Mitchells was slumped forward over the control yoke, his silver hair matted with sweat, completely unconscious. His head rested at an unnatural angle against the instrument panel, and a thin line of drool traced from his mouth to his uniform shirt. First Officer David Park was still conscious, barely. He gripped the armrests of his seat with white knuckles, his face the color of old newspaper. His chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths, and his eyes were unfocused, glazed with confusion and pain. "Can't, something's wrong." Park's words came out slurred and broken like a record playing at the wrong speed. "Vision, blurry, can't think straight." Dr. Thornton moved with swift precision, dropping to her knees beside Captain Mitchells. She pressed 2 fingers against his carotid artery, checking for a pulse while simultaneously lifting his eyelids to examine his pupils with a small penlight from her bag. "Pulse is weak and thready. Pupils are responsive but sluggish," she announced in the clipped, professional tone of someone accustomed to emergencies. "What happened? When did symptoms start?" 15, maybe 20 minutes ago," Park gasped, struggling to form words. His right hand trembled violently as he tried to point at the captain. He complained, "Stomach pain," then just collapsed. "I tried to. His sentence died mid-thought. His eyes rolled back, showing whites, and his body went rigid for a terrible moment before going completely limp. He slid sideways in his seat, held in place only by his shoulder harness. "No, no, no," Monica's voice cracked with panic. Dr. Thornton abandoned the captain and lunged for the first officer, catching his head before it struck the center console. She felt for his pulse, checked his breathing, pulled back his eyelids. "Both of them," Monica whispered, her voice climbing toward hysteria. "Both pilots are down. How is that possible?" "Contamination or poisoning," Dr. Thornton said, her hands moving rapidly as she assessed Park's vitals. "Something they both consumed or were exposed to. Did they eat the same meal?" Jessica's mind raced back through the flight. "The crew meal," she said, her voice sounding distant and strange to her own ears. "About 90 minutes ago. They both ate the seafood pasta from the first-class galley. Monica and I had the chicken." "Scombroid poisoning may be toxins, possibly bacterial contamination," Dr. Thornton muttered, more to herself than to them. "Timeline fits. This is severe, much worse than typical food poisoning. We need to stabilize them, get oxygen, call for medical advice." A high-pitched alarm suddenly pierced the cockpit. Jessica's eyes snapped to the instrument panel. Among the dozens of screens, gauges, and indicators that meant nothing to her, one display caught her attention because she recognized it from her basic flight training: the altitude indicator. The numbers were decreasing: 37,800 feet, 37,600 feet, 37,400 feet. The aircraft was descending. "The plane is going down," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What?" Monica's head whipped around. "Look at the altitude, we're descending." Jessica pointed at the display with a trembling finger. "The autopilot is still on. See that button lit up, but something's wrong. We're losing altitude." Dr. Thornton kept working on the pilots, but her voice was urgent. "Can you level the plane?" "I don't know how to fly this," Monica said, backing away from the controls like they were radioactive. "I don't know anything about this. I've never even been in a cockpit before." Jessica stared at the bewildering array of controls. The Boeing 777 cockpit looked like something from a science fiction movie. 6 large display screens dominated the instrument panel, showing navigation maps, flight data, engine parameters, and system status. Between and below the screens were hundreds of switches, buttons, and knobs, each labeled with cryptic abbreviations: EICAS, FMC, CDU, MCP, EFIS. The control yoke in front of the captain's seat looked familiar. She'd used similar yokes in her Cessna, but everything else was alien. Where were the throttles? How did you adjust the autopilot? What did all these switches do? 37,200 feet now. They'd lost 1,800 feet in less than 2 minutes. "We need help," Monica said, her voice rising. "We need to tell someone, air traffic control, the airline, someone." She grabbed the PA microphone with shaking hands and pressed the button. Her voice, usually so confident and professional over the speakers, now cracked with barely controlled terror. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Monica Rodriguez, your senior flight attendant. We have a medical emergency in the cockpit. If there is anyone on board with pilot experience, any pilot experience at all, please identify yourself immediately to a flight attendant. Please, if anyone can fly an aircraft, we need you in the cockpit right now." The announcement echoed through the cabin. Jessica could hear its effect immediately. A rising murmur of confused and frightened voices, questions shouted from seat to seat, a child beginning to cry. Seconds passed, 10 seconds, 20, 30. No one came forward. Monica made the announcement again, her voice nearly breaking. "Please, is there anyone at all, who knows how to fly a plane?" Silence. Not a single passenger stood up. Not one person raised their hand. 275 people on this aircraft, and not one of them was a pilot. Jessica felt her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. The altitude indicator continued its relentless countdown, 36,800 feet. Every number that clicked past meant they were falling closer to the ocean. Eventually, the autopilot would level off at its programmed altitude, but what if it didn't? What if something else failed? What if the descent continued until... She couldn't finish that thought. Dr. Thornton had both pilots laid out as best she could in the cramped cockpit space, administering oxygen from the portable bottles, checking vitals, doing everything possible to stabilize them. But both men were completely unconscious. Neither would wake up soon enough to land this plane. Monica turned to Jessica, tears streaming down her face. "What do we do, Jessica, what do we do?" Jessica stared at the controls, at the yoke, at the screens, at the throttle levers she'd finally spotted on the center console. Her mouth was completely dry. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clench them into fists. 87 hours. That's all she had. 87 hours in tiny propeller planes that weighed nothing, flew slow, and had simple mechanical controls and basic instruments. This was a Boeing 777, a technological marvel with fly-by-wire systems, computerized everything, engines that produced 110,000 pounds of thrust each. It was impossible, completely impossible. She'd never even sat in a jet cockpit before, let alone flown one. But she knew something that Monica didn't. She knew how to read airspeed and altitude. She knew what the artificial horizon display meant. She understood the basic principles of flight, lift, weight, thrust, drag. She knew how to talk to air traffic controllers. She knew the phonetic alphabet, radio procedures, emergency protocols. It wasn't much, it wasn't nearly enough. But it was more than anyone else on this airplane had. Jessica took a deep, shuddering breath and looked at Monica. "I can try." "What?" "I have a pilot's license. Private pilot, single-engine land. I'm working on my commercial rating." The words tumbled out faster now, as if speaking quickly would make them more convincing. "I've never flown anything like this, never even close, but I understand the basics. I know how to read instruments. I know radio procedures. I can try." Monica's eyes went wide with something between hope and horror. "Jessica, there are 275 people on this plane. 275 lives." "I know." Jessica's voice was steadier than she felt. "And they're all going to die if nobody does anything." Dr. Thornton looked up from the unconscious pilots. Her face was grim, but she nodded once. "Get in that seat, now." Jessica moved forward on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. She slid into the captain's seat, still warm from Mitchell's body, and her hands found the control yoke. It was larger than the Cessna's, the leather grip worn smooth from thousands of hours of use. She looked at the radio panel, found the transmit button and pressed it. Her voice came out small and frightened, but at least it came out. Oakland Center, this is Pacific Airways Flight 447. Both pilots are incapacitated. I am a flight attendant with a private pilot's license. I have 87 hours total flight time. I need help. Please, I need help now. Static. Then a voice, calm and professional, the most beautiful sound Jessica had ever heard. Pacific 447, Oakland Center copies. Stand by. Jessica's hand remained frozen on the yoke, her eyes locked on the altitude indicator. 36,400 feet. Still descending, Captain Sarah Mendez's voice cut through Jessica's panic like a lifeline thrown to a drowning swimmer. Jessica, my name is Sarah Mendez. I'm a Boeing 777 Czech airman. That means I train other pilots on this aircraft. I've been flying the 777 for 15 years. I've seen everything this bird can do, and I'm going to teach you how to fly it. But first, I need you to take a breath. Can you do that for me? Jessica realized she'd been holding her breath. She exhaled shakily, her knuckles white on the yoke. Okay, I'm breathing. Good, now listen carefully. You said you have a private pilot's license, right? Single engine. Yes, Cessna 172, 87 hours total time. That's perfect. That means you understand the fundamentals. This aircraft operates on the same principles as your Cessna: lift, drag, thrust, weight. The difference is scale and automation. The 777 wants to help you. It's designed to be flown by humans like you and me. Do you understand? I think so. You need to know so, Jessica. I need your confidence. Can you do this? Jessica looked at the altitude indicator, 36,100 feet. The descent had slowed but not stopped. Behind her, Monica was blocking the cockpit door, keeping curious and terrified passengers from seeing the chaos inside. Dr. Thornton was still working on the unconscious pilots, trying everything to revive them. I can do this, Jessica said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. Outstanding. Now, first things first, don't touch anything yet. The autopilot is engaged. See the illuminated button on the mode control panel. That's the panel right above the screens in front of you. Jessica scanned the bewildering array of controls and found it, a section of the panel with buttons labeled Alt Hold, LNAV, VNAV, App, and others. One button glowed green, Autopilot. I see it, autopilot is on. Perfect. That means the aircraft is flying itself right now, following its programmed route. But I need to understand what's happening with your descent. Tell me what you see on the primary flight display. That's the screen directly in front of you. Jessica focused on the central screen. It showed an artificial horizon, a line dividing brown and blue representing earth and sky. A small airplane symbol sat on that line. Numbers surrounded it: altitude, airspeed, heading, vertical speed. Altitude is 36,000 feet. We've been descending, but it's slowing down. Airspeed is 490 knots. Heading is 285 degrees. Vertical speed is -200 feet per minute. Good, you're reading everything correctly. The descent is because the autopilot is following its programmed altitude, which was probably set for Tokyo's approach. We need to stop that descent and level off. I'm going to talk you through adjusting the autopilot. Are you ready? Ready. On the mode control panel, you'll see a window displaying a number. That's your altitude selector. What does it show? Jessica found it, a digital display showing 35,000. It says 35,000 feet. That's why you're descending. The autopilot is taking you down to that altitude. We're going to change it. See the knob next to that display. Jessica's eyes found a large rotary knob beside the altitude window. Her hand hovered over it, trembling. I see it. Turn it clockwise, slowly. Watch the numbers increase. Set it to 37,000 feet. That will give us a nice comfortable altitude to work with. Jessica grasped the knob. It felt solid, mechanical, reassuring in its physicality. She turned it slowly, watching the numbers climb. 35500, 36000, 36500, 37,000. The descent stopped immediately. The vertical speed indicator swung to 0. The aircraft leveled off perfectly at 36,000 feet and began climbing back to the newly selected altitude. It's working, Jessica's voice cracked with relief. We're climbing, the vertical speed is positive. You just flew a Boeing 777, Mendez said, and Jessica could hear the smile in her voice. You told it what to do and it obeyed. See, the aircraft wants to help you. Now let's talk about fuel and navigation. For the next 20 minutes, Captain Mendez walked Jessica through the basics of the Boeing 777 systems. She learned that the flight management computer, the brain of the aircraft, contained their entire route from Los Angeles to Tokyo. She learned how to read the fuel display, 156,000 pounds remaining, burning roughly 12,000 pounds per hour. She learned that the engine displays showed N1 percentages, how much thrust each engine was producing. It was like drinking from a fire hose. Every explanation led to 3 more questions, but Jessica absorbed it all, her flight training providing a framework to hang this new knowledge on. She understood what a VOR was, what an ILS approach meant, how to interpret airspeed in knots versus miles per hour. Oakland Center kept other traffic well clear of Flight 447, creating a protective bubble around the crippled aircraft. Airlines across the Pacific were notified. Pacific Airways Operations Center in Los Angeles became a command hub, with senior pilots, dispatchers, and engineers all focused on one goal: getting Jessica and her passengers safely on the ground. Jessica, you're doing incredibly well, Mendez said. But I need to tell you something important. We've been calculating your fuel and you can't make Tokyo. You've lost too much time, and continuing would put you dangerously low on reserves. Jessica's brief moment of confidence evaporated. What does that mean? It means we're diverting. We're working with Pacific Airways Ops right now to choose the best airport. Most likely Anchorage, Alaska. It has excellent weather, long runways, full emergency services. You'll have every resource available. How far is Anchorage? About 75 minutes from your current position, well within your fuel range with comfortable reserves. Jessica's mind raced. Anchorage meant landing. She'd been so focused on just keeping the plane flying that she'd pushed the inevitable conclusion to the back of her mind. Eventually, somehow, she would have to bring this massive aircraft down from 37,000 feet and put it on a runway. Mendez, I've never landed anything bigger than a Cessna. How am I supposed to land a 777? We have options, Mendez replied carefully. The 777 has an auto-land capability. The aircraft can land itself with minimal input from you as long as conditions are right. If the weather at Anchorage is good, if the ILS, the instrument landing system, is working perfectly, auto-land is your best option. You'll monitor the approach, make sure everything stays within parameters, but the aircraft will do the actual landing. And if auto-land doesn't work? There was a pause. Then I'll teach you how to land manually, one step at a time, Jessica. First, let's get you turned toward Anchorage. Suddenly, a harsh alarm pierced the cockpit. Bang, bang, bang. A message flashed on the engine indicating and crew alerting system. Fuel imbalance. Jessica's heart jumped into her throat. Mendez, I have a fuel warning, fuel imbalance. Stay calm. Read me exactly what the display says. Jessica forced herself to focus on the screen showing fuel quantity. Left wing has 82,000 pounds. Right wing has 80,000 pounds. The difference is 2,000 pounds. That's actually not bad, but we should balance it. An imbalance can affect handling, especially during landing. We're going to transfer fuel from the left wing to the right. I'm walking you through this step by step. Mendez guided Jessica through accessing the fuel system page on one of the displays. Jessica had never seen anything like it. A schematic diagram of the aircraft showing fuel tanks in each wing, the center tank, trim tanks. Lines connected them, representing fuel pumps and transfer valves. See the fuel transfer switch on the overhead panel. Look up above you. Jessica craned her neck. The overhead panel was a vast expanse of switches, circuit breakers, and lights. She found the fuel section, located the transfer switch. I found it. Position it to left to right. Jessica's hand trembled as she moved the switch. Immediately, the fuel quantities began changing on the display. Left wing decreasing, right wing increasing. The imbalance narrowed, 1,800 pounds, 1,500, 1,200. She watched, barely breathing, as the numbers approached equilibrium. 800 pounds, 500, 200, 100. The alarm silenced. The fuel imbalance message disappeared. Transfer complete, Jessica announced, her voice shaky with relief. Fuel is balanced. You're doing phenomenally, Mendez said. You just handled your first abnormal situation. Jessica, I want you to know something. Most pilots with thousands of hours would be stressed in your situation. You're processing information, making decisions, staying calm. You have the instincts of a natural pilot. Jessica wanted to believe her, but fear still gnawed at her stomach. She'd made some adjustments and pressed some buttons, but the real test was coming. Landing. The one thing that couldn't be faked or approximated. Either you got the aircraft safely on the ground or you didn't. Behind her, she heard Monica's voice, quiet but strained. Jessica, the passengers are getting really scared. They can see us heading north instead of west. They know something's wrong. What should I tell them? Jessica turned slightly, meeting Monica's frightened eyes. Tell them the truth. Tell them we're diverting to Anchorage for a medical emergency. Tell them I'm working with experienced pilots on the ground. Tell them. She paused, searching for words that wouldn't be a lie. Tell them we're doing everything possible to get them home safely. Monica nodded and slipped out of the cockpit. Mendez, Jessica said quietly into the radio, what are my real chances here? The veteran pilot was silent for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was honest. If everything works, if the weather holds, if the autoland functions, if no other systems fail, your chances are very good. But Jessica, I won't lie to you. This is one of the most difficult situations any pilot could face. What matters is that you're trying. What matters is that you're not giving up. And I'm going to be with you every single step of the way until those wheels touch the runway. You're not alone up there. Jessica looked out the windscreen at the darkening sky ahead. Somewhere out there, Alaska was waiting. A runway, safety, or disaster. Okay, she said. Let's get to Anchorage. Jessica, we're going to program Anchorage into your flight management computer, Captain Mendez said, her voice steady and methodical. This is where things get a bit technical, but I promise you can do this. The FMC is essentially the brain of your aircraft. It knows where you are, where you're going, and how to get there. We just need to tell it to change the destination. Jessica looked at the center console between the pilot seats. Two small screens with keyboards sat there, glowing with green text on black backgrounds. They looked like something from a 1990s computer terminal. I see them. There are two screens with keyboards. Those are your control display units, CDUs. You can use either one. They're linked. I want you to press the button labeled INIT-REF. That stands for Initialization Reference. Jessica's finger hovered over the buttons surrounding the screen, finding the one labeled INIT-REF. She pressed it. The screen changed, displaying a page of information about the aircraft's position, winds, and fuel. Now press the button next to RTE, that's route. She did. Another page appeared showing their current flight plan, lax to RJTT Tokyo's airport code. For the next 10 minutes, Mendez walked Jessica through the process of creating a new route to Anchorage. It was like learning a new language while someone held a gun to your head. She typed airport codes, waypoints, airways. Each entry had to be precise. One wrong letter could send them hundreds of miles off course. Type PANC, that's Anchorage's code, Mendez instructed. Then press the button next to the destination field. Jessica typed carefully. PANC, her finger pressed the line select key. The FMC thought for a moment, processing, then displayed the new route. A distance appeared, 1,247 nautical miles. Flight time, 2 hours 14 minutes. I have it, Jessica said, hardly believing she'd successfully programmed a commercial airliner's navigation computer. Route to Anchorage is loaded. Beautiful. Now press execute, that's the button on the bottom right. That will activate the new route. Jessica's finger hovered over the button. This was it. Once she pressed this, they were committed. No more Tokyo. No more following the original plan. They were diverting to Alaska with 275 terrified passengers, 2 unconscious pilots, and a 19-year-old girl who had no business being in this seat. She pressed exec. The autopilot banked the massive Boeing 777 smoothly to the right, turning northwest toward Alaska. Jessica felt the turn through her body, the gentle pull of inertia as 600,000 pounds of aircraft changed direction. On the navigation display, she watched their flight path curve away from the track to Tokyo and point toward a new destination. Turn complete, she announced. We're heading to Anchorage. Outstanding work, Mendez said. Now I need you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Operations has calculated your fuel and you're in good shape. You'll arrive with plenty of reserves, more than enough for a normal approach and landing, plus alternates if needed. The weather in Anchorage is currently good. Light winds, visibility 10 miles, a few scattered clouds at 15,000 feet. Perfect landing conditions. Jessica felt a tiny spark of hope. So Autoland should work. That's what we're planning for. The 777's Autoland system is remarkable. It's been certified to land in zero visibility conditions, though obviously we won't be testing that today. If everything stays nominal, the aircraft will fly the entire approach, touch down on the runway centerline, and even deploy the thrust reversers automatically. Your job will be to monitor the systems and take over only if something goes wrong. What could go wrong? Mendez paused. The Autoland system requires several things to work perfectly. First, the ILS, the instrument landing system, at the airport must be operating normally. Second, all 3 of your autopilot systems need to be functioning. Third, weather must remain above certain minimums. And fourth, no other aircraft systems can fail that would compromise the Autoland. That's a lot of ifs, Jessica said quietly. It is, but Jessica, thousands of Autolands happen successfully every year. The system is proven. I've personally done dozens of them for training and certification. The odds are strongly in your favor. Behind Jessica, the cockpit door opened slightly. Monica slipped inside, her face pale and drawn. She'd been managing the cabin, trying to keep 275 passengers calm while their lives hung in the balance. Jessica, Monica whispered, they want to know what's happening. The cabin is. It's getting bad. People are crying. Some are writing goodbye messages to their families. There's a couple in row 34 who keep asking if they should prepare for a crash. What do I tell them? Jessica's hands tightened on the yoke, even though the autopilot was flying. The weight of all those lives pressed down on her like a physical force. 275 people. Business executives who'd never see their next meeting. Parents who might never tuck their children into bed again. Students, retirees, newlyweds, grandparents, all of them depending on a teenager who'd only ever landed a 2-seater propeller plane. Tell them, Jessica began, then stopped. What could she say? that everything would be fine. She didn't know that she had it under control. She barely understood half the systems on this aircraft. "Tell them the truth," she finally said. "Tell them we're diverting to Anchorage. Tell them I'm a pilot. Don't mention my experience level, and I'm working with experts on the ground. Tell them the aircraft is designed to land itself, and we're setting up for that. Tell them to follow all instructions from the flight attendants, keep their seatbelts fastened, and prepare for landing in about an hour." Monica nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "Jessica, you're so brave. I don't know how you're doing this." "I'm terrified," Jessica admitted, "but someone has to try." Monica squeezed her shoulder and left to brief the passengers. Through the cockpit door, Jessica could hear her voice on the PA system, calm and professional despite everything. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Monica with an important announcement. Due to a medical emergency with our flight crew, we are diverting to Anchorage, Alaska." The words faded as Jessica focused back on the instruments. The aircraft was flying beautifully, rock steady at 37,000 feet, tracking directly toward Anchorage. Mountains of data scrolled across the screens: fuel flow, engine temperatures, hydraulic pressures, electrical loads. Everything was green. Everything was normal. Except nothing was normal. "Mendez," Jessica said into the radio, "when do we start descending?" "About 40 minutes from now. Anchorage Center will clear you to begin descent and will configure the aircraft for the approach. Jessica, I want to prepare you for something. When we get closer, you're going to hear a lot of radio chatter, controllers, emergency vehicles, other aircraft. It's going to sound chaotic, but everyone is there to help you. The entire aviation community is watching this flight right now. Every controller, every pilot, every dispatcher, they're all pulling for you." Jessica hadn't considered that. Right now, all across the Pacific, in air traffic control centers and airline operations rooms, people were tracking Flight 447. They were watching a dot on a radar screen that represented her, this aircraft, and 275 lives. "No pressure," she thought bitterly. Dr. Thornton's voice came from behind. "Jessica, I need to tell you something. Captain Mitchell's is showing signs of improvement. His vitals are stabilizing. First Officer Park is still unconscious, but both of them are alive. Whatever this was, food poisoning, contamination, I think they're going to survive." It was good news, but it didn't change Jessica's situation. Even if the pilots woke up right now, they'd be too weak, too disoriented to fly. She was still the only person in this cockpit capable of operating the aircraft. "How long until they could fly?" Jessica asked. Dr. Thornton shook her head. "Hours minimum, maybe longer. They're both severely compromised. Even after they regain consciousness, their cognitive function will be impaired. I wouldn't trust them with a car, let alone a jetliner." So that was it. Jessica was landing this plane, one way or another. She looked ahead through the windscreen. The sun was setting somewhere to her left, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. Below, the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly, dark and cold and unforgiving. Somewhere ahead, Alaska waited, mountains, glaciers, and one runway that might as well have been on the moon for all the impossibility of reaching it safely. "Mendez," Jessica said quietly, "what happens if I can't do this? What happens if I mess up the landing?" There was a long pause. When Mendez spoke, her voice was honest. "Then you do your best, and whatever happens, everyone will know you tried. But Jessica, I don't think you're going to mess up. I think you're going to land that aircraft, and 275 people are going to walk off and hug their families and tell stories about the brave young woman who saved their lives. That's what I think." Jessica wanted to believe her. She wanted to believe that courage and determination could overcome inexperience and fear. She wanted to believe that the universe wouldn't be cruel enough to put her in this situation, without also giving her the ability to succeed. But belief didn't change the mathematics. Belief didn't add hours to her logbook or experience to her skills. All she had was 87 hours in a Cessna, and a burning determination not to let 275 people die. She hoped, prayed it would be enough. "Okay," Jessica said, straightening in the captain's seat. "Let's get ready to land this thing." Descent began 42 minutes later, exactly as Captain Mendez had planned. Jessica reduced power slightly, watching the engine thrust indicators drop from 92% to 85%. She dialed the altitude selector down from 37,000 feet to 10,000 feet, and the autopilot obediently pitched the nose down 2 degrees. The Boeing 777 began its long glide toward Alaska. "Beautiful," Mendez said over the radio. "Descent rate is perfect, about 1,800 feet per minute. You're doing everything right." Below, the Pacific Ocean gave way to the rugged coastline of Alaska. Jessica could see mountains in the distance, their peaks covered in snow that glowed pink in the fading sunlight. It would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Now, those mountains looked like jagged teeth waiting to devour them if she made a single mistake. Anchorage approach control came on frequency. "Pacific 447, Anchorage approach. We have you on radar, descending through 28,000 feet. You're cleared direct to Anchorage VOR. Expect vectors for ILS runway 7 left. Emergency equipment is standing by." Emergency equipment, fire trucks, ambulances, crash crews, all waiting for her to either succeed or fail spectacularly. Jessica keyed the mic. "Pacific 447, cleared direct Anchorage VOR." Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "Jessica, at 18,000 feet, I need you to start configuring the aircraft," Mendez instructed. "That means extending flaps and slowing down. The 777 is a clean, slippery aircraft. It wants to fly fast. We need to tame it down to landing speed gradually." Passing through 20,000 feet, Jessica reached for the flap lever on the center console, a large handle that moved through detents labeled 1, 5, 15, 20, 25, 30. She'd studied this in her manuals, but seeing it in person was different. Everything was bigger, heavier, more consequential. "Flaps 1, she announced, moving the lever to the first detent. The aircraft shuddered slightly as the massive trailing-edge flaps on each wing extended just a few degrees. The airspeed began to decrease naturally as drag increased. "Good, now reduce speed to 230 knots using the speed selector." Jessica found the speed window on the mode control panel and rotated the knob until it displayed 230. The auto-throttle system, which she'd learned controlled engine power automatically, reduced thrust to maintain the new speed. They descended through 15,000 feet, then 12,000 feet. The mountains were much closer now, filling the windscreen with their intimidating presence. Jessica could see individual trees, frozen lakes, the distant lights of Anchorage beginning to twinkle as dusk settled over Alaska. "Flaps 5, Mendez said. "Continue slowing to 200 knots." Jessica moved the flap lever again. More drag, more deceleration. The aircraft was transforming from a sleek, fast jet into something more controllable, more manageable. At least that was the theory. They were at 11,000 feet when everything changed. A master caution chime sounded, a double-note warning that made Jessica's heart leap. Amber lights illuminated on the overhead panel. A message flashed on the engine indicating and crew alerting system display in angry amber letters. "HYD SYSB press." "Mendez," Jessica's voice jumped an octave. "I have a hydraulic warning, system B pressure." She heard rapid conversation in the background, Mendez conferring with engineers. When the captain came back on, her voice was tighter, more controlled. "Jessica, read me the hydraulic pressure indications. There should be a display showing all 3 systems." Jessica found it on one of the screens, a schematic showing 3 hydraulic systems, left, center, right, labeled as systems A, B, and C in some places. System B's pressure gauge was dropping, 2,800 psi. 2500, 2,200. System B is losing pressure. It's down to 2,000 psi and falling. Systems A and C are normal at 3,000 psi. Okay, stay calm. The 777 has 3 independent hydraulic systems for redundancy. Losing one isn't catastrophic. But another chime, another warning. HYDSYS, a FLUCTUETONS. No, 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 Jessica whispered. System A's pressure was bouncing erratically. 3,000, 2,700, 2,900, 2,400. Mendez, System A is fluctuating now. What's happening? The background noise on the radio became more urgent. Voices overlapping. Someone shouting to check the maintenance logs. Another voice running through failure scenarios. Mendez came back, and for the first time Jessica heard genuine concern in her voice. Jessica, listen to me very carefully. We have a problem. I don't know what's causing this, possibly a leak, possibly a pump failure, possibly contamination in the hydraulic fluid. But here's what it means. Autoland requires all 3 hydraulic systems functioning normally. With System B gone and System A compromised, Autoland is not available to you. The words hit Jessica like a physical blow. Autoland was her safety net. Autoland was the plan. Autoland was how a girl with 87 hours in her logbook was supposed to land a 600,000-pound jetliner. What do I do? Her voice came out small, frightened. You hand-fly the approach and landing. We're going to switch to manual flight and I'm going to talk you through every single step. Jessica, you can do this. The aircraft is still controllable with one good hydraulic system. It will feel heavier, like driving a car without power steering, but it will respond to your inputs. Jessica stared at her hands on the yoke. They were shaking uncontrollably. Through the windscreen, Anchorage was getting closer. She could see the city lights clearly now, spreading across the valley between mountains. Somewhere in that pattern of lights was a runway, a thin strip of pavement that she had to find and land on with precision. She'd landed a Cessna dozens of times, but that was a 2,550-pound aircraft that flew at 65 knots on final approach. The Boeing 777 weighed 235 times more and would cross the runway threshold at 150 knots, nearly 3 times as fast. Dr. Thornton's voice came from behind, urgent. Jessica, Captain Mitchell's just opened his eyes. He's conscious. Jessica whipped around. The captain was indeed awake, his eyes unfocused and confused but open. Hope surged through her chest. Captain Mitchell's, can you fly? Can you take over? Mitchell's tried to speak. His mouth moved, but only slurred, nonsensical sounds came out. His right hand lifted weakly toward the controls, then fell back. His eyes rolled, struggling to focus. He's not capable, Dr. Thornton said grimly. His cognitive function is severely impaired. Jessica, I'm sorry, but he can't help you. The hope died as quickly as it had appeared. Jessica was alone in this. Pacific 447, Anchorage approach. Turn left heading 10, descend and maintain 4,000 feet until established on the localizer. The approach was starting. They were being vectored toward the runway. In minutes, just minutes, she would have to land this aircraft. Mendez, I can't do this, Jessica said, her voice breaking. I've never hand-flown an approach. I've never landed anything in bad weather. I've never. Stop. Mendez's voice cut through her panic like a blade. Jessica Chen, look at me. I know you can't actually see me, but look at this radio and imagine I'm standing right there with you. You can do this. Do you know how I know? Because you've already done a dozen impossible things today. You programmed an FMC. You managed fuel. You flew a holding pattern. You handled system failures. Every single one of those things, you did it when you didn't think you could. But landing is just one more thing, one more procedure. Yes, it's the hardest one. Yes, it requires precision. But you have something most pilots don't have in situations like this. You have me. You have an entire team of the best pilots, engineers, and controllers in the world focused on you. We're going to land this plane together. Do you trust me? Jessica took a shuddering breath. Behind her, Monica stood in the cockpit doorway, tears streaming down her face. In the cabin beyond, 275 people waited, praying, hopping, trusting that the girl in the captain's seat could do the impossible. "I trust you," Jessica said. "Then let's bring this bird home. First step, disconnect the autopilot. There's a red button on the yoke, press it." Jessica found the button under her left thumb. Her hand hovered over it. Once she pressed this, she would be hand flying. No automation, no safety net, just her, the yoke, and the controls. She pressed it. The autopilot disengaged with a triple chime and a voice warning. "Autopilot disconnect. Autopilot disconnect." Suddenly, Jessica felt the aircraft through the controls. The yoke had pressure, resistance. The Boeing 777 was in her hands now, literally. Every movement she made would translate directly to the control surfaces, ailerons, elevators, rudder. "I've got it," she said, though her voice shook. "I'm hand flying." "Beautiful. Now small corrections only. The 777 is a big aircraft. It doesn't like rapid inputs. Think of it like steering a ship, not a sports car. Gentle, smooth, deliberate movements." Jessica made a tiny adjustment, feeling the aircraft respond sluggishly with the degraded hydraulics. It was like the controls were moving through syrup, but they did move. The aircraft banked slightly, then leveled. "Anchorage in sight," the approach controller said. "You're 6 miles from the outer marker. Cleared ILS runway 7 left approach. Wind is 50 at 12 knots. Weather, ceiling 800 feet, visibility 2 miles in light snow." 800 feet. That meant she'd be in clouds until just 800 feet above the ground. She'd break out with seconds to make corrections, seconds to decide if the approach was good enough to land or if she needed to go around. And they didn't have fuel for multiple attempts. This was it, one chance, one approach, one landing. 275 lives. "Okay," Jessica whispered. "Let's do this." Jessica's world narrowed to the instruments in front of her and Captain Mendez's voice in her headset. Everything else, the unconscious pilots behind her, the terrified passengers in the cabin, her own fear, faded into background noise. She had one job now, fly the approach. "Flaps 20, Mendez instructed. "Reduce speed to 170 knots. Jessica moved the flap lever, feeling the aircraft shudder as more of the massive flaps extended from the wings. The nose wanted to pitch up with the added drag, but she corrected gently, keeping the flight path steady. The speed bled off, 200 knots, 185-170. "Good, now gear down." The gear lever is on the right side of the center console, a wheel-shaped handle. Jessica's hand found it. She pulled the lever down. A mechanical rumbling vibrated through the aircraft as 3 massive landing gear assemblies, nose gear and 2 main gear trucks, extended into the slipstream. Red lights appeared on the gear indicator, then flickered to green. Nose, left, right. All 3 locked down. The aircraft felt different now, heavier, dragging more. They were committed. Landing gear couldn't be retracted once deployed past a certain speed. There was no going back. "Pacific 447, you're 3 miles from the outer marker," Anchorage approach called. "Turn left heading 5. You're slightly right of course." Jessica banked the aircraft gently left, feeling the controls fight her through the degraded hydraulic system. It was like arm wrestling the plane, constantly applying pressure to make it respond. Sweat ran down her back despite the cool cockpit air. "Heading 5, she confirmed, her voice tight. The navigation display showed a magenta line extending from their position to the runway, the ILS localizer beam they needed to follow. They were intercepting it now, the aircraft sliding toward that center line. Jessica made tiny corrections, watching the localizer needle on her primary flight display crawl toward the center. "You're doing great," Mendez said. "Flaps 25. Speed 160 knots. We're getting configured for landing." "More flaps, More drag, more slowing. The aircraft groaned and vibrated as the systems fought to maintain flight at these slower speeds. Jessica's right hand was locked on the throttles now, making constant small adjustments to maintain exactly 160 knots. Too slow and they'd stall. Too fast and they'd float down the runway, possibly running out of pavement. 2 miles from outer marker, the controller said. You're cleared to land runway 7 left. Wind now 40 at 15, gusting 22. Emergency equipment is in position. Gusting 22. The wind was picking up. Jessica felt it buffeting the aircraft, making the wings rock slightly. She corrected, keeping the wings level, but her heart hammered. Crosswinds. She'd done crosswind landings in her Cessna, but never in winds this strong, never in an aircraft this massive. They descended through 3,000 feet, then 2,500, still in clear air, but Jessica could see a wall of gray clouds ahead, the ceiling at 800 feet that she'd have to descend through before seeing the runway. Flaps 30 full flaps, Mendez said. Final landing configuration. Speed 145 knots. Jessica, once we go into the clouds, stay focused on your instruments. The runway will appear, trust me. Jessica moved the flap lever to 30. The aircraft seemed to settle, becoming heavier and more stable, or maybe that was just her imagination. She reduced power, bringing the speed to exactly 145 knots. The airspeed indicator became her obsession. If it dropped below 140, warning bells would sound. Below 135, stick shaker would activate, warning of an approaching stall. At 1,500 feet, they entered the clouds. The world outside disappeared instantly, replaced by featureless gray nothing. Snowflakes streaked past the windscreen, illuminated by the aircraft's landing lights. Jessica's spatial orientation immediately tried to betray her. Her body insisted they were banking left, but the instruments showed wings level. Trust the instruments. Trust the training. 1,000 feet. The automated voice called out from the ground proximity warning system. Jessica's eyes flicked between the altimeter and the localizer. They were slightly left of centerline. She corrected right. The glide slope indicator showed them slightly high. She reduced power fractionally, letting the descent rate increase from 600 feet per minute to 700. 500 feet, the GPWS announced. Still in clouds, still blind. 400 feet. Jessica's breathing was rapid, shallow. Her hands gripped the controls so tightly her knuckles were white. Come on. Where's the runway? I need to see the runway. Trust your instruments, Mendez said, as if reading her mind. Don't chase the needles, small corrections, you're doing perfectly. 300 feet. The aircraft shook from a wind gust. Jessica fought to keep the wings level, added a touch of power to maintain speed. 200 feet. Please let me see the runway. 100 feet. And then, like a curtain being pulled back, they broke out of the clouds. Jessica saw it. Runway 7 left stretched ahead through the swirling snow, a strip of concrete lined with brilliant white lights. But her heart sank. They were high, at least 50 feet too high, and right of centerline by at least 30 feet. The approach was not stable. You're high, Mendez said, her voice calm but urgent. Reduce power, let it sink, correct left. Jessica chopped the throttles, the nose dropped. Too much, they were sinking too fast now. She added power back. The sink rate slowed. The runway was rushing up 60 feet, 50 feet, 40 feet. And they were drifting right. The wind, the crosswind was pushing them. Left rudder, Mendez commanded. Angle into the wind, wing down on the left. Jessica's feet worked the rudder pedals while her left hand pushed the yoke, dropping the left wing slightly. It was a slip, using opposite rudder and aileron to track straight down the runway while crabbed into the wind. She'd done this in the Cessna, but never at 145 knots, never in a jumbo jet. 30 feet, 20 feet, 15 feet. They were still too high, too fast, floating. The runway was disappearing beneath them. She could see the touchdown zone markings passing by 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet, 2,000 feet. "Let it settle," Mendez said. "Don't force it, let it come down naturally." 10 feet, 5 feet. Jessica held her breath. The main landing gear kissed the runway with a chirp-chirp of rubber on concrete. Not a greaser, not even close to smooth, but they were down. The nose was still in the air, and Jessica held it there, feeling the aerodynamic braking as the nose wheel stayed up. "Hold the nose off," Mendez coached. "Let the aerodynamic braking work." At 120 knots, Jessica let the nose settle. The nose wheel touched with a solid thump. Spoilers, speed brakes. They should deploy automatically. Check the flight controls page. Jessica glanced at the display. Spoilers, deployed. The panels on top of each wing had risen automatically, destroying lift and pushing the aircraft firmly onto the runway. But they were still going 120 knots, 139 miles per hour, and Jessica could see the end of the runway in the distance. Anchorage's runway was over 10,000 feet long, but they'd touched down 2,000 feet into it. They needed to stop. Now. "Thrust reversers," Mendez said. "The thrust reverser levers are behind the throttles. Pull them up." Jessica found them, 2 large levers tucked behind the throttle quadrant. She pulled them up. A massive roar filled the cockpit as the engine thrust reversed direction, the engines now pushing forward instead of pulling the aircraft. The deceleration was immediate and violent. Everything in the cockpit rattled. "Now brakes. Firm, steady pressure on the brake pedals at the top of the rudder pedals. Don't lock them up. Let the anti-skid work." Jessica's feet found the pedals and pushed. The pressure pulsed beneath her feet as the anti-skid system prevented the wheels from locking. She pushed harder, feeling the Boeing 777 fighting to stop, momentum warring with friction. 100 knots, 80 knots, 60 knots. The end of the runway was still approaching. Emergency vehicles lined the taxiway, their lights flashing red and blue through the snow. Fire trucks, ambulances, crash rescue. 40 knots, 30 knots, 20 knots. And finally, mercifully, the aircraft stopped. Completely stopped. On the runway. Upright. Intact. For a moment, one perfect crystalline moment, there was absolute silence in the cockpit. Jessica sat frozen, hands still on the controls, unable to process what had just happened, unable to believe it was real. Then the cabin erupted. Cheering, screaming, crying, applause that sounded like thunder. People were hugging each other, sobbing into their hands, thanking God and fate and whoever was flying this plane. Over the radio, a dozen voices were talking at once. Anchorage Tower, the approach controller, Captain Mendez, other pilots who'd been listening on frequency. Some were congratulating her. Others were crying. Jessica could hear the emotion breaking through professional composure, voices cracking with relief. Pacific 447, Anchorage Tower. Remain on the runway. Emergency equipment is approaching. Are you able to taxi? Jessica stared at the radio, her mind blank. Taxi. She could barely remember her own name. Pacific 447, the controller repeated gently. Are you okay? She keyed the mic. Her voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. We're down, we're safe, everyone's safe. And then Jessica Chen, 19 years old, 87 hours in her logbook, began to cry. The fire trucks surrounded Pacific Airways Flight 447 within seconds, their powerful spotlights cutting through the swirling snow and illuminating the massive Boeing 777 sitting on Anchorage's runway like a beached whale. Paramedics and emergency personnel swarmed the aircraft, but there would be no catastrophe to respond to. No twisted metal. No flames. Just 275 souls who'd been given a second chance at life. Inside the cockpit, Jessica couldn't move. Her hands remained frozen on the controls, her body locked in position as if releasing her grip would somehow undo what she just accomplished. Behind her, Monica was openly weeping, one hand covering her mouth, the other reaching out to touch Jessica's shoulder as if to confirm she was real. Dr. Thornton had already returned to tending Captain Mitchell's and First Officer Park, both now semi-conscious but severely disoriented. They would survive. The contaminated seafood that had nearly killed them would leave them sick for days, but alive. Alive because a 19-year-old flight attendant had done the impossible. "Jessica," Captain Mendez's voice came through the headset, thick with emotion. "You did it. Do you understand? You saved them all. Every single person on that aircraft is going home because of you." Jessica couldn't respond. Her throat was too tight, choked with emotions she couldn't name. Relief, terror, disbelief, exhaustion. She'd been running on adrenaline for over an hour, and now that it was over, the crash was hitting her like a physical wave. The cabin door opened, and passengers began streaming out, not in panic but in stunned, grateful silence. Many paused at the cockpit door, catching glimpses of the young woman in the captain's seat. An elderly man with tears streaming down his face pressed his hand to the doorframe and whispered, "God bless you, sweetheart. God bless you." A mother with a sleeping infant stopped, looked directly at Jessica, and mouthed the words "thank you" with such profound sincerity that Jessica felt fresh tears spill down her cheeks. One by one they filed past, business executives in expensive suits, college students, elderly couples holding hands, a group of nurses heading to a medical conference, all of them alive, all of them safe. The evacuation took 20 minutes. Fire crews inspected the aircraft, finding no damage beyond normal landing wear. The Boeing 777 had performed flawlessly even with its compromised systems. When the last passenger had descended the mobile stairs, Jessica finally released the controls. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to clasp them together. Monica helped her stand on legs that felt like water, guiding her toward the cockpit door. "Come on, hun. Let's get you down from here." The moment Jessica stepped onto the jetway, she was surrounded by emergency personnel, airport officials, and FAA investigators. Questions came from every direction. What happened? How did you know to do that? Did the pilots give you any instruction? Have you ever flown a 777 before? "Please," a senior paramedic said, pushing through the crowd. "Give her space. She needs medical evaluation." But Jessica barely heard them. Her eyes were fixed on a figure emerging from a black SUV near the aircraft, a woman in a pilot's uniform, silver hair pulled back, moving with the purposeful stride of someone who'd spent a lifetime in command. Captain Sarah Mendez. The woman whose voice had been Jessica's lifeline, whose expertise had guided every decision, whose calm confidence had kept her from breaking down when the fear became overwhelming. They met in the middle of the snow-dusted tarmac. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the veteran pilot with 15,000 hours and the flight attendant with 87. Then Mendez pulled Jessica into a fierce embrace, and both women wept. "You were magnificent," Mendez whispered into Jessica's hair. "The finest piece of flying I've ever witnessed. Do you hear me? The finest." "I couldn't have done it without you," Jessica managed through her tears. "I was so scared." "Being scared doesn't make you less brave. It makes you more brave." Mendez pulled back, holding Jessica by the shoulders, looking her in the eyes. "What you did today, pilots with 10,000 hours would have struggled with that. You had 90 minutes to learn an aircraft, manage multiple system failures, and execute a manual landing in marginal weather. That's not luck. That's skill, courage, and raw talent." The next hours passed in a blur. FAA interviews, medical checks, calls from Pacific Airways executives. The airline's CEO personally flew to Anchorage to meet her, offering counseling, support, and something that made Jessica's heart stop: a fully funded path to become a commercial airline pilot, starting immediately. "We take care of our people," he said simply, "especially our heroes." The media descended within hours. By morning, Jessica Chen's name was on every news channel in America. Teenage flight attendant saves 275 lives. Miracle landing in Alaska. The girl who wouldn't give up. Her face was everywhere, young, exhausted, still in her crumpled Pacific Airways uniform, looking far too small to have accomplished something so monumental. Passengers gave emotional interviews, describing the terror of learning both pilots were incapacitated, the long hour of uncertainty, and the moment they touched down safely. Many specifically requested to meet Jessica, to thank her personally, to tell her how her courage had given them a second chance with their children, their spouses, their dreams. One passenger, Robert Chen, no relation, a businessman from Seattle who'd been in seat 19B, made a promise. "Whenever Jessica Chen is flying, I'm flying with her. That young woman earned my trust for life." Jessica returned home to Los Angeles 3 days later, escorted through airports by security as crowds gathered to catch glimpses of her. Her parents sobbed when they saw her, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. Her father, the aerospace engineer who'd first taken her to that airshow, looked at his daughter with awe and pride. "I always knew you'd be a pilot," he said. "I just didn't know you'd prove it quite so dramatically." Pacific Airways kept its promise. Jessica enrolled in an accelerated flight training program, completing her commercial certificate, multi-engine rating, and instrument rating within 6 months. The FAA granted her special recognition for her actions. Airlines across the country offered her positions. Aviation magazines featured her story. Flight schools used her as an example of why basic training matters. Those 87 hours in a Cessna had quite literally saved 275 lives. She completed her ATP certificate, the highest-level pilot license, at age 21. At 22, she was hired as a first officer at Pacific Airways, the youngest in the airline's history. She flew regional jets, then narrow bodies, building hours and experience. 5 years after that terrifying night over the Pacific, First Officer Jessica Chen upgraded to captain. And the aircraft type she chose, the Boeing 777. On her first flight as captain, Jessica sat in the left seat, the captain's seat, no longer as a terrified teenager in over her head, but as a fully qualified, highly trained airline captain. Her first officer was a veteran with 8,000 hours who'd specifically requested to fly with her. As they pushed back from the gate at Los Angeles International Airport, bound for Tokyo, the destination they'd never reached that night, Jessica made her PA announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. My name is Jessica Chen, and it's my honor to be flying you to Tokyo today. We're expecting smooth conditions and an on-time arrival. Please sit back, relax, and trust that you're in good hands. We'll take care of you." In seat 19B, Robert Chen smiled. He'd kept his promise. This was his 43rd flight with Captain Chen. He'd fly 100 more if he could. As the Boeing 777 climbed through the clouds, ascending into clear skies above the Pacific, Jessica allowed herself a small smile. This was where she belonged. This was what she was meant to do. 5 years ago, she'd been a girl who didn't think she could. Today, she was a woman who knew she could do anything. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary heroes are ordinary people who simply refuse to give up when everything seems impossible. They're the ones who, when faced with the unthinkable, take a breath, grip the controls, and say, "Let me try." And then they do more than try. They fly.